Praise be Jesus Christ, and forward with Mary. Good and holy evening, my dear children, and welcome back this evening with our catechesis on the Great Prelate. A couple of clarifications first, and then we'll get into the specifics. I've already spoken at length, to tell the truth, of the Great Prelate. Those who have been following me for years know that it's not a question that is problematic with the little remnant. This is not an issue that I have been dealing with recently, however. I'm not doing politics. It is a question that I treat exactly as one of the cornerstones of my, let's call it, my mission. And so this allows me, now, before going into specifics, to clarify a couple of things. The first thing I would like to clarify is this. The topic of the Great Prelate is not necessarily a biblical one, but a prophetical one. It belongs in the category of the so-called private revelations. And yet something in sacred scripture can be identified without forcing interpretations. Of course, I must tell you, I was formed, I say this by confessing this, in a theological school, first at the Pontifical Theological Faculty of Sicily, then with another doctorate at the Pontifical Gregorian University, in a theological training that had quite a problematic view regarding prophecies, revelations, and so on. I give just one example so that you understand me. Before authoring my book on the Apocalypse, a book that I will now quote, in which I speak several times of the Great Prelate, those who have read it now, in front of certain themes, despite the solicitations coming from many sides, I close my heart for matter of prevention of injury. For example, the lifting of the elect, otherwise known as the rapture. I never wanted to hear stories about this, but gently, because around Italy and around the world, many of you have asked me, Father, what do you think of the elect? What do you think of their lifting? And I always glossed over the question because I did not believe it. It seemed to me something like that of the Great Prelate that is too far for my sensitivities. God knows if I'm telling the truth. I did not invent anything. But then later, when I wrote the book on the Apocalypse, on the Symphony of the Lamb, with the seriousness that a theologian must have, and I remind you that I try to be serious, as a theologian I went to look for whether there is a component related to the lifting of the elect in the fathers of the church. And I was left speechless, stunned. Stunned is just the right word, because I went to discover that St. Augustine speaks of the lifting of the elect even in De Civitate Dei. So it is modernist theology that has censored these concepts. I do not know if I am explaining myself well. I am entering into a question of methodology. That is, modernist theology, contemporary theology, has completely censored the prophecies and extinguished the Spirit. Because when I go to see that St. Augustine, speaking of the lifting of the elect, reports, but there will be this rapture of the elect in the time of the great imposture of the Antichrist, and they will be taken to a different place, because in the world there will be a cosmic conflagration. I immediately asked forgiveness from God, Our Lady, and all the saints, because, do you understand? And then I changed my mind. I changed my mind as I write in my book on the Apocalypse, and I began to understand that it was important that certain themes, evidently sneered at or censored or boycotted by contemporary theology, deserve, precisely for this reason, to be recovered and deepened. We need to talk about it. And now one of these censored semantic fields is the one concerning the Great Prelate. Second premise, the Great Prelate speaks, and in the prophecies there is much talk about him. This too is astounding. It was said yesterday here that, like the Messiah in sacred scripture, he receives many prophecies. The whole Old Testament is, from a Christian perspective, a speaking about the Messiah. We see that already in the early Middle Ages, in the fathers of the church, much less. But it is God who guides history. And anyway, in fact, in the fathers of the church, there is very little of this. With Saint Hildegard of Bingen and others, And here I have a list of various prophecies. There are, uninterruptedly, until Don Dolindorotolo, just to be close to our days, that is the 1960s, citations and arguments concerning the Great Prelate. So this is not a peregrine theme at all, and we are only at the second premise. And I have two more. In this discourse, the premises are much more important than everything else. Indeed, it is a theme present in Christian literature, even the canonical one, because it is expressed and narrated by mystics and saints, such as Saint Catherine Emmerich, or even Saint Amadeo of the Amadeans, who was one of the 7 founding saints of the Order of the Servants of Mary, and again, Blessed Anna Maria Taigi, also speaking of the Great Prelate. It is not at all a subject to be addressed by scratching your navel and bursting out laughing. So here's the second premise. The Great Prelate is a pertinent, present, and consistent theme in Christian literature, at least of the second millennium. Third premise, the idea, and this concerns us of the little Catholic remnant, given recent events, that with Benedict XVI, everything must end. This is an idea beyond the time of the Second Coming, and I would like to begin with these people, a theological discourse. But let me digress. I referred to by certain people, as I was made aware recently, by a post that was shown to me by a very high-ranking person, elevated in spirit, who, since I've been publicly shamed, speaks of me as if I were a 𝐷 in a 𝐷𝐚𝐿, that is a sort of dishonest salesperson on a TV shopping channel, wearing religious robes. And when you see that they write similar things about you, too bad that then, however, they act offended when I call them out. On the other hand, however, they can afford to say what they want, and so I for them would be the 𝐷 in a 𝐷𝐚𝐿. And I understand that it is not possible to talk about them. And yet I would like to have a conversation with them, with these people. Sorry, we all agree that Pope Benedict is the reigning Pope. What is now divisive, as evidently turns out, is that Benedict XVI would be the last Pope. Now, this assertion can be said to be authentic on one condition only. We are talking pure theology here. The idea that Benedict XVI is the last Pope in the history of the Church is authentic and valid only if you bring evidence that Jesus Christ is returning. And it must be objective evidence, of course. So yes, in that case, we agree. Then I will also agree with the person who calls me 𝐷 in a 𝐷𝐚𝐿. I really don't care what people call me. Everyone will have to answer before God. Love your enemies, love your enemies. I do not care how they label me. I will agree with these kind of people should it be verified that we are in the times of the second coming. Because when Christ returns, we will no longer need Peter. But if we do not have evidence, and it could be unambiguous evidence, but I would get lost in the subject. To give an example, it could be the mass conversion of the Jews. This is one of the things expected. Or a cosmic conflagration. These things, however, however much they are moving, are not yet to be proven. Where the Church will still be present, and the Church without Peter is unthinkable. The Catholic Church does not exist without Peter. I would like that these people who call me 𝐷 in a 𝐷𝐚𝐿 to have the humility to reflect on these things. The Church without Peter does not exist, and so the idea that Benedict XVI is the last Pope, with whom everything is finally closed, and then that the Church at that point dissolves into something like a scattered congregation of domestic loyalties, is completely, careful here, very insidious as a proposal, because it would seem true, but it is not. There is a hierarchy, and to those who say to me, but you are not a bishop, I remember that I, like all priests, belong to the second degree of the ecclesiastical hierarchy. And it is not that I have arrived now. For over 20 years I've been at the second rank of the ecclesiastical hierarchy. The third degree, as you know, is that of the episcopate, or the summit. Therefore, a church, Catholic, without Peter and without hierarchy, either becomes something like the Lutheran or Orthodox churches, or it ceases to exist. However, one would no longer have the Catholic Church, then one cannot think that Benedict XVI is the last pope. And on these questions, therefore, the Great Prelate intervenes. That is, he comes to make it clear that God will not leave us alone, indeed. Fourth premise, the Great Prelate comes to point out that God will not leave us alone. On the contrary, the Great Prelate, in the prophecies that we will now see, has connotations, characteristics which are superlative, because he has a special mission. And the decisive theological category is that of the mission. Here, then, I wanted to put these four premises, which, from a methodological point of view, seemed incontrovertible to me, unless you choose to renounce the logos to move on to the anti-logos. I say this for those who understand Latin and Greek. And to call me one amarchi and a Cossack means to fall into the anti-logos. Here we are instead remaining in the logos and keeping calm, curbing passionate instincts, and reflecting because I'm trying to make people think. Because of these neo-modernist drifts, neo-Lutheran on the one hand, and the sedevacantist on the other. So in the fourth introduction, consideration does not mean at all pulling the shoes off Benedict XVI, because in any case he is 95 years old. My task, my mission is to prepare the little Catholic remnant, until proven otherwise, led by myself. Of course, not everyone who is with Pope Benedict XVI is with us. But what does this mean? We must work together to create harmony. It is not only that, as you are seeing, to ferry you during the Bergoglian storm. Of this, at least I hope, the final credit will be attributed to me, but also to prepare the turning point. Do you understand where the problem lies? Because there are those who do not want to deepen this turning point, who knows for what reasons, noble or less noble, but certainly in the full antilogy, do not want to deepen it, do not accept it. And this inside the little Catholic remnant. And it seems to me that this we risk stopping at the threshold of the Red Sea, while we instead must cross through it. That is, the turning point is after Benedict XVI. And Benedict XVI, Joseph Ratzinger, is 95 years old. The life expectancy of a man, I speak specifically of males, is no more than 80, 82 years of age. Arriving at 95 years makes him the longest-lived pope in history. Now, nothing prevents him from reaching even 100 years of age, for heaven's sake, and only God knows this. But in any case, it is not realistic to expect the prospect of 20 more years. This is clear. And then we must think about the turning point. You must think about getting there prepared. Do you understand? Because our enemies will work to annihilate us when there will be the fake conclave, and then we'll do the funeral of the Pope, and Bergoglio, or whomever for him, will preside the funeral of Pope Benedict, Pope Emeritus, so-called. They will annihilate us in the media. And there the trumpet of our ghettoization will sound, because if Benedict XVI is alive, dear children, they are in total disarray. And so, they have extraordinarily little to rant at us. A little while ago, a person showed me something on his cell phone that struck me a lot. Bergoglio proclaimed, NATO should not bark at Russia's gates. Interesting, don't you think? You can see that he listens to my catechesis. In my opinion, look, maybe not, but and how I insisted on this, the Holy See has never been so unilateralist. The Holy See cannot take sides unilaterally in an armed conflict as he has done in Ukraine. And now Bergoglio has taken a chameleon-like position, as he often does, and he even wanted to go to Ukraine and so on. Today or yesterday, he remarked, NATO should not bark at Russia's doorstep. Then, always with this very diplomatic style, as we know, well, and about this, a person wrote, "Behold, despite those who say that this is not the Pope, this is how the Vicar of Christ speaks. But sorry, this is pure antilogism." But pardon me, didn't Bergoglio remove the title of Vicar of Christ as Pope? And this just to give you some examples. And here then, they cannot afford to do much while Benedict XVI is still present, that is the 𝐶𝐶𝐽𝐾. And there's no doubt about this, and specifically the 𝐷 𝐶𝐽𝐾, because the concept of 𝐶𝐽 is identified in two further distinctions. That is the masculine singular definite article, precisely, or with reference to a person, and the other is with the tou 𝐶𝐽𝐾, or the neutral gender of the Greek. Therefore, with reference to a fact, or a something, a situation. They can be both. Regarding the person, I have no doubt that it is Benedict XVI. And we have proof of this. God keeps him alive because he must be patient until he is ready to pass the torch to the Great Prelate. We cannot understand Benedict XVI without this passage, this relay to the Great Prelate. And we have the evidence. Remember, when Benedict said, "Already now I promise obedience to my successor." And this was Benedict XVI who was consecrating all this. Among my followers, there's someone who says, "Father, you will see that before Benedict XVI dies, he will say something important for the little remnant." But did Benedict's comments seem insignificant? It seems little to you that in the last consistory, he said to the cardinals, "Already now I promise obedience to my legitimate, lawful successor." He is talking about the Great Prelate. Because Benedict XVI was made, or has made things clear, both because he has studied them, and in an anti-modernist position he has never disdained prophecies or extinguished the Spirit, and because the Lord reveals them to him. Benedict XVI's mission is to pave the way for the Great Prelate. And if Benedict XVI is Moses, the Great Prelate will be Joshua. Therefore, how do we put it? How do we deal with these naysayers? We want to stay on this side of Jericho. Why does Moses die? Since Moses dies, do we remain on this side of the Promised Land after 40 years in the desert? Or is there a Joshua? And while Moses, that is, Benedict XVI, here, do you see that there are biblical categories? There are the biblical categories. Goes to be God increasingly clearly. Already now, the Great Prelate advances. You must understand this important concept. Then if one does not accept it and does not understand it, I really cannot do more. But Joshua exists and is there. For it had not been for Joshua, the Jews would have remained on this side of the wilderness. And for those who know biblical geography well, I don't know how many of you know that Moses out of Egypt led the Jews no less, not along the coast, but because God had to test them, but through the deserted and inhospitable Sinai Peninsula, where they remained a wandering nation for 40 years. Until going up from Jordan, they entered, through the Jordan, into the place predestined for them by the Lord. But who entered the Promised Land? Moses? No, he did not. Look from afar, says God. And so it goes with Benedict XVI. God is showing Benedict XVI that we do not yet visualize. He has everything clear. That is why he is so serene. Otherwise, he would not be able to fall asleep, that man. I'm sure of that. If he would have remained on the throne of St. Peter, he would have been killed. But since he knows that there is a plan of God, and it is no coincidence that he spoke of himself as a Moses figure, it is also logical to say there is also going to be a Joshua, because Joshua introduces the Jews as a military leader to the Promised Land. Otherwise, the work of God would have remained unfinished, incomplete. And so, Benedict XVI is to Moses as the Great Prelate is to Joshua. Joshua is the leader of God who, under the guidance of St. Michael, the archangel, introduces the Jews into the battle against the invalid occupants of the Promised Land and conquers the Promised Land itself. And so with Joshua, with the Great Prelate, Catholics will recover the throne and take back the Catholic Church, sold out to the Masonic powers. I do not know if I was able to explain this clearly. If you do not reflect on these things, you then consider them antilogisms. Precisely as the 𝐷 with the Cossack. Come on. It is really something depressing, not so much for me as for these detractors, these naysayers, are not looking good right now. And I understand that the matter of the Great Prelate is the fundamental issue at this point. It is obvious. There is no doubt that Satan, as he played his cards against Benedict XVI, is already beginning to play against the Great Prelate, precisely because he knows that it is the great prelate who, like Joshua, will obtain victory. And Benedict XVI has prepared all of this. Of course, everyone remembers Moses, but not so much Joshua. Joshua is less well known than Moses, correct? Well, so it will be in history. I mean that the great prelate will have a problem. That is, he will not be elected with a conclave, with all the pomp and ceremony, and with the global media broadcasting it to the entire world, because he will not look out from the loggia of St. Peter's, dressed in white, preceded by the voice of the outgoing Cardinal Camerlengo, Habemus Papum. All the sacred scenographic apparatus will not announce the great prelate at all. Instead, he will be elected by the Catholics of Rome, and we will see it in a miraculous way. And this is the aspect that I would like to emphasize on this evening, weather permitting. That is, the election will be done in such a way as not to create precedent for a mystical episcopate, and will be made based on an election desired by the Christians of Rome, because the Pope is the Bishop of Rome. And yet, to identify him, and this can reassure us all, everybody, I hope, God will provide an unequivocal sign. And I will give just one example of this. When Pope Fabian was elected, Saint Fabian Pope, that is, the Christians of Rome were praying, imploring the Lord about who would be the next Pope. And while they prayed, the Holy Spirit, in the form of a dove, rested on the head of Fabian, who, poor man, passed by there and saw himself taken by force by the crowd, and became a Christian. He probably was not yet a Christian. In fact, a similar thing happened to St. Ambrose. And so Fabian was placed on the throne of Peter. To complete the picture, Fabian was even died as a martyr. Here then is how God then answered them about the next pope. I believe, indeed, I have no doubt, and the prophecies say so. I now have this excerpt of Saint Amadeo, and I'll read it to you, and it will be similar to that for the Great Prelate, in fact. Well, this was the gist of all the premises regarding the discourse on the Great Prelate. Now let us examine the relevant prophecies. Now this evening I do not have time to go into all of them, but I hope that at least to the 1,715 who are following us on live stream, this aspect is clear here. Excluding the prophetic messages relating to the Great Prelate means deciding to cut off the matter about the times we are experiencing. That is, Benedict XVI is not the last outpost, because after him there will be the Great Prelate. I want to give a sampling of these prophecies, so let's start with the best known and most cited, that of Our Lady of Good Success. God only knows how many times we've spoken about it. Therefore, these are Marian apparitions that took place in Ecuador, in Latin America, in Quito, in February 1594 in the convent of the Immaculate Conception. The recipient is Mother Mariana de Torres y Berriocha, whose cause of beatification is underway. In any case, the apparitions have been recognized by the Church. In these apparitions, while Mother Mariana was praying in the choir of the chapel, Mother Mariana noticed that the lamp of the tabernacle had gone out, leaving it almost in complete darkness, and what was about to go to light it again, when she felt blocked by an unknown force, and she remained there waiting. Suddenly, Our Lady appeared, overcoming the darkness with her splendor. Confiding to the visionary one of her secrets, Our Lady told her, I remind you that we are in the end of the 1500s, the extinguishing of the lamp that burns before the captive love. What expressions that Our Lady uses for the Eucharist? Captive love. It has many meanings. The first is this: at the end of the 19th century, and for much of the 20th century, various heresies will spread. And if you think about it, this prophecy here has been fulfilled verbatim. Beware, because there is an attempt on the part of modernist theology to apply the criterion of liberal interpretation also to prophecies. Let me explain. If you read the Gospels, Jesus says, for example, that he is going to Jerusalem to die. Well, what do modernists and liberals say? That he did not say. That he did not say it. That he cannot have said it because it is too clear in his expression, and therefore it was the first Christians to put it in his mouth. And so the suspicion is cast here. And here with the prophecies it will be the same thing. Rest assured that they will work to say that maybe they are not true. These words were not said by this guy or that guy himself. It is like Catherine Emmerich. I remember a quarrel I had some time ago with a confrere who, of course, has not stopped denigrating me gratuitously without ever examining the substance of my arguments. But oh well, it does not matter. For example, I say that if he had listened to the catechesis of this morning, I think so, I do not know, he should have had the honesty to respond to those things that are not precisely by attacking me, because they go out of their way to attack me. Well, I'll remind you that he, speaking of me, said, this one here is ignorant. He is a self-styled theologian because he cites Catherine Emmerich, whose visions were transcribed by Clemens Brentano. Now, you know that Catherine Emmerich went into ecstasy. She saw, and Clemens Brentano, poet and writer, wrote down what Catherine Emmerich had seen. So what did the modernists try to do? To make believe that those were not true apparitions. As for the discourse of Jesus in the Gospels, precisely. Therefore, it is not you, but Clemens Brentano who writes, and this Luciferian tactic is applied to the apparitions of Catherine Emmerich, to the Third Secret of Fatima, and even to those of Mother Mariana. Now, for example, in the case of Catherine Emmerich, I had then explained to that priest and brother, reiterating that a French priest, based on Catherine Emmerich's mystical visions, paid for the archaeological excavations in Ephesus, in modern-day Turkey, at the spot where the Madonna had indicated to Catherine Emmerich. And on that basis, therefore, the archaeological finds of that house, of the house of the Virgin Mary, came out as she had seen it, exactly like that. Understood? And that it could not have been Clemens Brentano spinning a story. Do you understand? So you must trust. Well, then, Our Lady speaks of the advent of heresies, of modernist, Neo-Arian, Neo-Lutheran, and under their power, the precious light of the faith will be extinguished in souls. We see it right before our eyes by the almost total corruption of morals. At that time, there will be a great physical, moral, public, and private calamities. I learned, among other things, just now of the _th earthquake in Italy. The few souls who remain faithful to grace will suffer martyrdom. This concerns us, we of the little remnant. Of course, few souls, we speak of a few. It is not that we must think about who knows what large numbers. Of course, we are not so few, but neither are we the majority. And now let us skip all the other things and go, for reasons of time. It would be nice to deepen the whole message of Our Lady of Good Success, but we come to the matter of the Great Prelate. Now, in this absolutely photographic scenario, if you agree, why does Our Lady paint in this way the object of the prophecies, among other things? Can the image of the extinguishing of the light allude to the invalidity of the sacraments that everyone thinks are valid? I do not know. See for yourself. Certainly, if the light is extinguished, it means that there is no more real presence. Or am I wrong? I do not know. Our Lady shows Mother Mariana that the light of the tabernacle goes out. That is, there is no longer the real presence. Understand? And in the context of this deception, apostasy, etc., Our Lady does not let things go this way, in the wrong direction, but speaks, and it is the first time that it is spoken of in an official and a sensational way, in fact, of the Great Prelate. I specify immediately that Prelatus can mean anything, but now I cannot elaborate. He may not necessarily be a bishop, but then we'll come back to this. Meanwhile, let us see what Our Lady says. There will be many factors that are working together in Mother Mary's revenge. And she says to Mother Mariana at the end of the 1500s, pray insistently. Imagine already at the end of the 1500s, Our Lady asked to pray for the Great Prelate. It means that this matter is decisive, to ask to pray 500, 600 years before. That is, if one must pray 500, 600 years before such a thing, it means that it is a critical concept. Claim tirelessly and cry with bitter tears in the secret of your heart, asking our Heavenly Father that for love of the Eucharistic heart of my most holy Son, He put an end to these devastating times as soon as possible. Therefore, there are troubled times. We have been living them for a century or so, but it is expected that God will put an end to all of this. And it will, exactly, only one way, in only one way. He will do so by sending, these are always Our Lady's words, into the church that prelate. And here we are talking about it for the first time. Who will have to restore the spirit of his priests? And here Our Lady describes him. This beloved son of mine will be endowed with a rare ability. He will be a kind of half alien, half superhuman, subhuman. You see, a little. I'm just kidding. Of humility of heart. It is interesting to note how Our Lady describes him on the one hand with these characteristics of docility and tenderness, and on the other as a ruthless teacher against terror. But then I say, these are words of Our Lady. Reflect on them. All those who say that with Benedict XVI everything ends. They are going off kilter and into disarray with all evidence. And taking up the Our Lady's description of the Great Prelate, docility, divine inspiration, and here it is, of strength to defend the rights of the Church and of a tender and compassionate soul, so that, like another Christ, he may provide for the great and the small, without despising the most unhappy. In his hand will be placed the scales of the sanctuary. Here, there is a reference to the Apocalypse, but we do not have time here to delve into that, and I speak of it several times in my book on the Apocalypse. You see how many times in my book on the Apocalypse the theme of the Great Prelate returns. He will have the scales of the sanctuary in his hand. That is, he will be judge and will rule with balance. That is what he meant. In continuing, and in fact, so says Our Lady, so that everything may be done with weight and measure, and so that God may be glorified. The rapid coming of this father and prelate, however, will be an obstacle, because Our Lady says it should come quickly. In reality, his arrival will not be so fast, because there will be an obstacle. And so let us see what the obstacle for the Great Prelate is. For the Great Prelate to arrive, that timidity of all souls consecrated to God, which is also the cause of Satan's dominion over these lands. Here, this is the most famous prophecy about the Great Prelate. But it is not the only one, because as I told you at the beginning of my catechesis, in the 4 premises, the Great Prelate is mentioned in many prophecies. Last Friday I mentioned that Saint Amadeo of the Amadeans, co-founder of the Servants of Mary, who speaks in the year 1200 of the Great Prelate, that's well before the apparition of Mother Mariana of Our Lady of Good Success. He calls him the Great Shepherd. Let us examine what he says. This predestined man, so there is a predestination of God, it means that no one will be able to stop him. He'll be hindered like no other, but like Joshua, as the head of the Jews against the pagans, to introduce the Jews into the promised land, so the Great Prelate will recover the church profaned by Bergoglio, by the false church, by Pachamama, by idolatry, by heresy, by apostasy. This is the shocking prophecy because it is from the year 1200. He will observe the canons and the ancient customs of the fathers of the church. He will eradicate the bad ones, make the good ones obey, and establish them solidly in the faith. He will take much more care of souls and spiritual matters than of temporal ones. Herein some clues come out of that trace a profile of the Great Prelate that already exists from the point of view of Benedict XVI's preparation, as I told you. As for Moses, who prepares Joshua, for example, Benedict XVI has renounced the exercise of the ministry, and therefore not being the Vatican head of state anymore. He no longer must meet diplomatic leaders and perform other official duties as popes have always done, or heads of state, and so on, because he no longer has any temporal or political power. And so in this way, Benedict XVI is preparing and has prepared the way for the Great Prelate, his successor, elected by the Christians of Rome, those who did not bow down to heresy and were not with Bergoglio, but remained faithful to Benedict XVI. The Great Prelate will have as a fundamental characteristic precisely this. He will be a completely spiritual pope, a pope who will take care only of the spiritual dimension, who will not worry, that is, to meet the politician X or the leader Y, or to go to the United Nations. No, because he will have no temporal power. It will be all spiritual. And the little remnant will need this. He will be a completely spiritual pope, a St. Peter. We will go back to basics, because St. Peter was all spiritual. He had no temporal power. And continuing, we discover that the Archangel Gabriel speaks to Saint Amadeo, a mystic of the Great Prelate. And how do I know it is the Archangel Gabriel? He will confirm what I said in my premises. Let's be clear here that we are talking about a saint. I'm not depending on a vision from some self-appointed mystic or guru from who knows where. That is, I'm citing authoritative sources recognized by the Church. We have seen Mother Mariana of Our Lady of Good Success recognized by the Church, and now, instead, we are talking about the prophecy of a holy founder of religious order who relayed these messages to the Holy See. Well, Saint Amadeo reports that the Archangel Saint Gabriel tells him who the Great Prelate is. Why the Archangel Saint Gabriel? Because Saint Gabriel is the Archangel who brings important messages, the most solemn news. For example, it is he who brings the announcement of the Incarnation. It is he who brings the announcement of the birth of John the Baptist. And so it is always he who announces the coming of the Great Prelate. Therefore, it is as if God were saying, pay close attention to the announcement that the Archangel Gabriel makes, because he is making an important announcement. And so the Archangel Gabriel revealed to Saint Amadeo, the shepherd whom God loves and chooses will enter the temple at the appointed time. Therefore, it is all foreseen in God's plan, when in the meantime the Antichrist will have taken everything. He will purify and reform the church, and all will be amazed. He will imitate the Lord by word and example. That is, who will see it. Now, when he will be chosen by the Christians of Rome, I say it officially here, I every day pray for these blessed Romans. To the Romans, wow, what a responsibility. What an important task. They have a responsibility, and it does not matter if it's 4 or 5. All of us are the piccolo resto, the little remnant, because now the time has come to start getting serious, because we must wait for the turning point. And it is not disrespecting Benedict XVI, indeed. It is to honor him in his sacrifice. What will be the point of stopping at his pontificate? He would not want it himself. We should pray, all of us, for those Catholics of Rome. When I go around Italy and the world, and then I stop in Rome and they greet me, I really feel, in awe. As if to say, this man will be among those who will have to choose. That is, the Catholics of Rome have an immense responsibility. But Antonio from Le Marche, who says to me, can I come? Because I'm from the Le Marche region and I am close to Rome. No, you are not from Rome and from the Church of Rome, because we must remain in the long tradition of the Church and must not do bizarre things, even if we will then be considered bizarre, and we're already experiencing it. With the undersigned now being labeled as the one Amarchi and a Cossack, and we will experience opprobrium and persecution. For us, it will be a joy. Rejoice and rejoice, Jesus says, when they lie and say all kinds of evil against you. What does it matter that they will say that we are bizarre with the mystical episcopate, that we invented things, that they instead had everything already clear before? What do we care? If each of us in the little remnant, whose members are the chosen ones, knows that this is the path to follow, then what will matter about everything else? Well then, I wanted to say this, that is, that the Catholics of Rome, faithful to Pope Benedict XVI, regardless of how many they are, because then, for example, in Verona, the Catholics are quintuple of the Catholics of Rome, although too with a certain patriotic parochialism. The representative of Lazio reiterates how even in Lazio there are many, but not like in Verona. Even if there are fewer, it must be them, after the death of Benedict XVI, not immediately. Here in this, since despite myself I have been entrusted with the task of suggesting, indicating, I may be willing to say how to do it next. That is, in the sense, it is not that the next day, immediately, time will pass, and then we will see these things better at the appropriate time. The Holy Ghost will inspire us, and then we will see it is going to be a miraculous election. However, God will send an unequivocal sign. This sign will be contradicted and attacked by the non-elect. And that for the elect of the little remnant, from Verona to Agrigento, from Cagliari to Taranto, from Val d'Aosta to the Dolomites of Trentino, there will be a sign, a precisely unequivocal one, based on which everyone can say, before the man indicated by the Lord, you are the Great Prelate. And again, he will teach all the secrets that are still hidden about the creation of the angels. Rome will be renewed in these days, those in which there will be, in fact, the Great Prelate, and will preside over the entire world. And it adds, the shepherd will be assimilated to King David. Interesting. Do you see how, again, biblical images are not lacking? I personally refer to Joshua because I like Joshua, with all due respect to the Archangel Gabriel, for heaven's sake. But precisely the Archangel Gabriel compares the Great Prelate to King David. Let us see why. We reiterate these are prophecies of holy people. I want to repeat this ad nauseum, precisely because here we do not do mysticology, but we speak of saints. Well, says the Archangel Gabriel, this shepherd will be similar to King David, because as the latter had reformed ancient Jerusalem, that is, he rebuilt Jerusalem, inhabited until then by the Jebusites, with the hill of Zion and the king of the Jebusites, and David, who became king of Judah and Israel, of the entire Holy Land, takes possession of Jerusalem and renews it. He consecrates it to God, and so on. And precisely just as David reformed the old Jerusalem, the shepherd will reform the new Jerusalem, that is, Rome and the church. This biblical image is simply extraordinary. Jerusalem was in ruins. It was a pagan city where idols were worshipped. King David arrives, reforms Jerusalem, and consecrates it to Yahweh. Well, says the Archangel Gabriel, the Great Prelate will come to Rome, sanctify Rome, and reconsecrate it to God, Jesus Christ. And then again, and he will be accepted as pastor. The Lord will give him grace and prudence, and will free his lips and tongue. And here then is the other passage. He will unite the Western Church with the Eastern Church into a perpetual union. The Catholic Church has always longed for this union with the Eastern Church. This great prelate will bring with him an innate sensitivity of love, of fraternal friendship towards the Eastern churches, which, in turn, will recognize in ways that only God knows this availability, and then he will bring the Eastern churches together with Rome. And here now we consider the other prophecies of Don Dolindo Ruotolo, Blessed Anna Maria Taigi, and all the others. That is, he will create 10 cardinals in the Eastern countries and 2 great patriarchs. 10 and 2 equals 12. And Don Dolindo Ruotolo, whom I confirm here in my book, The Symphony of the Lamb, speaks of 12 apostles, whom the great prelate will choose for collaboration in this work of reform of the church. Then there are also other things, incredibly beautiful, that Amadeus says. But it seems important to me that this election of the great prelate will take place in a miraculous way. This is what I told you a moment ago. Namely, I believe that the election of the great prelate will have 2 characteristics. Namely, from a historical canonical point of view, therefore nothing invented, the Catholics of Rome, as happened in the first millennium, will take care of electing him. Now, John Paul II, in the Apostolic Constitution, Universi Domini Gregis, in accordance with the election of the Roman Pontiff, forbids election by acclamation. That is correct. However, in extraordinary times of apostasy, in which the cardinals, who are normally responsible for the election of the Roman Pontiff, are no longer authorized to elect him, not by acclamation, but by election, the Roman people who remained Catholic will return to elect precisely the Bishop of Rome, the Roman Pontiff. The latter, in fact, cannot be elected by those who are heretics and apostates. Therefore, Monsignor Vigano says that if it turns out that Bergoglio is not the Pope, all the cardinals created by Bergoglio will not be qualified to elect the Pope. Instead, the pre-Bergoglian cardinals should gather. But this is science fiction. And God will not allow it, in my opinion, because this is the path that God has chosen. If anything, those consecrated by John Paul II and Benedict XVI, who now can be counted on our fingertips, are more afraid than rabbits. They are hidden. Burke was created by cardinal by Benedict XVI, but where is he now? Comastri was created cardinal by Benedict XVI, and now where is he? Yes, of course, he will also make beautiful broadcasts. I'm the first to listen to them. They also edify me, but it is a pity that he never spends a second on the current situation of the church and passes every morning, indeed, in front of the tree planted in honor of the Pachamama in the Vatican Gardens. Maybe he'll also turn away, but he is still complicit in not speaking. After all, he is a cardinal, and I'm speaking precisely of cardinals created by Benedict XVI. And there's still someone alive created by Wojtyla, by John Paul II. For example, the bishop who ordained me as priest, Cardinal Salvatore Di Giorgi from Puglia, is still alive, over 90 years old, and is one of those very few cardinals consecrated by John Paul II who are still alive. And these who would have had the right to meet if it turns out that Bergoglio is not the Pope, for the election of another Roman pontiff. But first, they never arrive, as I said this morning, to decide to say that there is some flop in the election of Bergoglio. They will never do it. Secondly, they will never, in my opinion, succeed in having the courage to come together to elect a new pontiff. So what do? Is there no pope after the death of Benedict XVI? Of course not. We will return to the Roman Catholics, who will elect the pope according to the elective criterion of the first millennium. On the other hand, if the conclave were of divine institution, I would now have to take this book of mine, put it under my arm, and say to you all, goodbye, I was wrong, I was fooling you. Because if it is of divine institution, one cannot argue. If something is founded by Jesus Christ, such as the church or the Petrine Munus or the sacraments, there is nothing to discuss, as Luther did. You would be considered a heretic. Case closed. But if the ecclesiastical institution is not of divine foundation, but was born during history, and perhaps not even very clearly so, as is the institution of the conclave, who says that the formula of the first millennium cannot be restored? Or that it was the Christians who chose the bishop? Where is it written that it is not possible? Where is it written? In times of heresy, it is indeed more than possible. It happened in Milan, where after the death of the bishop, who I don't remember what his name is now, the Christians of Milan had come to slaughter each other inside the Basilica of Milan, between the Arians and the Christians who remained faithful to the Holy See, thanks to Saint Athanasius. And to quell the riots, a Roman procurator, Ambrose, is sent, who had a Christian family, although he had not yet been baptized. And so Ambrose goes to quell the riots in the basilica. And as soon as a child enters, who then was always thought to be an angel sent by God, who knows in heaven what relationship Ambrose and that angel will have there, he says, Ambrosius Episcopus, Ambrosius Episcopus. And to think that this man had entered the basilica as a Roman officer to fix things, and then came out Bishop of Milan. Imagine St. Martin had escaped and gone to take refuge among the geese, and is represented among the geese. And the geese then began to sneer, to say to the faithful who followed him, he's here, he's here. Otherwise they would not have found him. So St. Martin was a bishop elected by geese. There were also bishops, saints, chosen by geese, understood? And let's not talk about St. Gregory the Great. St. Gregory the Great goes to hide in a cellar of the monastery of the 𝐥'𝐿 that is still there in front of the Colosseum, because after the death of Pelagius II, the Christians of Rome, as we are in 590 AD, go to him to kidnap him. They do not find him and turn the monastery upside down until, once found, they must tie him up. Against his will, they keep him tied up and carry him on a chair. Imagine the scene with that poor man shouting, leave me alone. I do not want to, I do not want to. And they give him everything immediately. He was already a deacon, then presbyterate, episcopate, and away, Bishop of Rome, in the blink of an eye, as if to say, here you are, Pontiff of Rome. Now shut up and guide us. So did the Christians of the first millennium. Where is it written that it is not possible? They will come upon us. Prepare. They will say even more than now that we are a cult, and so on. The more they see that we are in the truth, the more that the proud are blinded, and without the light of God, they will come upon us, and they will say precisely that we are a sect, that we are fanatics, that we are outside the church. We will blatantly disregard it. Rather they should be seen for how they are reduced to with the Pachamama in the Vatican. They are hypocrites and nothing else. They have Pachamama, the symbols of Satan, and they look at us. Now then, and therefore, it will be up to the Christians of Rome to elect the new pope, according to historical canonical modalities that harken back precisely to the first millennium. To elect the pope who is, first and foremost, Bishop of Rome, although he will not reside, as I assume, in Rome, for obvious reasons. He cannot be there in the seat occupied by the Antichrist. He will travel the world, I assume. I do not know. From a supernatural point of view, precisely, the Great Prelate will be announced by a sign that is particularly and incontrovertibly sensational. Finally, among the prophecies, there is also Catherine Emmerich. So to recap, the Marian Mother of Our Lady of Good Success of the 1500s, Saint Amadeus, founder of a religious order of the 13th century. Now we have Blessed Catherine Emmerich, who was beatified by John Paul II. Even she speaks of the new pope. She says in her visions, and I synthesize from January 27th, 1822, and this is after the vision of the two popes seen together, I saw a new pope who will be very rigorous, and he will be joined by cold and lukewarm bishops. He's not Roman, but he's Italian. So here for us begins at this point a selection that is decisive for us. It is not that prophecies have to be understood literally. However, for goodness sake, apart from the literal sense, what can an expression like he is not Roman but he is Italian mean or be understood? And she adds, he comes from a place not far from Rome, and I believe here he says, I believe that he comes from a devout family of royal blood. That is the profile of the Great Prelate, offered by Catherine Emmerich. So he's not from Rome, but he is Italian. And we are talking about a mystic beatified by John Paul II. So she's not a fraud. And let us be careful because modernist commentators work on bearing such prophecies. These modernists try to undermine these prophecies. These individuals attack us and have as their leader one who walled up the Eucharistic miracle alive in a church in Argentina. I don't know if I can explain their behavior. Then they come after us. But oh well, he comes from not far from Rome. He comes from a devout family of royal blood. Well, then she says something interesting. She says, I wish it were already the time when the Pope will reign dressed in red. What can this mean? It means he will be persecuted. Not killed outright, but with hit media pieces, condemnation, slander, worldwide moral defamation. He will die as if he would be skinned alive. Like St. Bartholomew, not in the physical sense, but in the moral sense. He does not wear white, he wears red, because as soon as they have a sense of who he may be, he will be feared by the enemies of the church. They'll be in dread. They will not lay their hands on him because God does not allow it. But he will suffer, and God prepares him, for this reason, for a long time, a moral persecution like no other in the history of the church. Really like no other. We will still have a few minutes, therefore, and I wanted to make you hear another prophecy, which seems to me especially important regarding the Great Prelate. But I prefer to move on to what I wrote in my book, The Symphony of the Lamb, about the Great Prelate himself. I have been talking about it on several occasions, and I would like to read them to you. First, on page 83, I write as entitled, The Great Prelate. This paragraph in my book that is always available at the Segreteria of Radio Domina Nostra. You can always request it. This book on the Apocalypse, The Symphony of the Lamb. Don Dolindo makes a prophecy. He writes that the conversion of the Jews will be the work of a holy pope. So see how you have a collage that becomes even more impressive. If Saint Amadeo of the Amadeans in the 13th century says that he will bring together Christians of the Eastern tradition and those of the West, Don Dolindo Ruotolo, who until proven otherwise is worthy of all the trust and esteem he deserves. He says that it will be the holy pope who will push the Jews to convert. What a figure he must be. And it will be the patient love of this last pope that will push the Jews to convert en masse to Jesus Christ. Now, with all the love we have for Benedict XVI, those who boast of the idea that he is the last pope, and therefore would apply these criteria to him, I would like to know, how could they ever apply them to him? With all due respect, Benedict did not unite Christians of the East and West. Ergo, he is not the Great Prelate. And so on and so forth. So how can they say he is the last pope? And then, it is a hypothesis that is quite possible and also very fascinating, because it would correspond to the description of the Great Prelate spoken of in the visions of Our Lady of Good Success, in which the coming of a pastor another Christ is announced. Because look, and I will tell you this, I will tell you that I'm not Don Dolindo, but I tell you this, the Great Prelate will have as one of the fundamental objectives the rekindling in lost Christians, a love for the church, and a belonging to Christ. I do not know how to say. He will make the gospel appealing again to the younger generations of his time, because it will come at a time when disaffection will have afflicted the church. That is, people could not care less about the Church of Rome. Well, the Great Prelate, with his charm, his charisma, for the way he will speak of Christ and the truth of the faith, will be able to recapture, to attract the attention of the Christian masses. And then, taking up Saint Amadeo, let us remember that we speak of a Protestant individual. Or rather, Saint Gabriel, the Archangel, refers it to Saint Amadeo. He says, in fact, that he will be Protestant. Then I, personally opening up a new prophetic horizon, wrote, he, the Great Prelate, from an early age will be forged by many trials. The devil, sensing his charisma, will try to kill him, even physically, several times, and will besiege him continuously, causing him physical pain and continuous torment. He will have to constitute, as we shall see, the actual disturbance of the dreams of the Antichrist and the false prophet. He will be endowed with a prophetic spirit, albeit with few resources at his disposal. And even here, while the false church will grow because of the Antichrist, with the 7 diadems of the beast, therefore media power, political power, cultural power, etc., etc., the Great Prelate will have only the power of the gospel. And this, however, is nice to think. He will have few human resources. It will be the little Catholic remnant during the evil empire, the 3.5 years mentioned in the Apocalypse, to whom to choose and elect the Great Prelate. He will enter harmlessly into this ultimate battle, but at the decisive moment he will launch the holy counteroffensive. Humble and devout, completely consecrated to Mary and under the tutelage of the Archangel St. Michael. Here you see I do not know of St. Amadeo and St. Gabriel, but precisely when we spoke of the secrets of the angels, basically we meant to talk about the restoration of angelic devotion, especially to St. Michael. He will gather the scattered flock and lead it to the truth, supporting it with fiery preaching. During the symbolic 3.5 years of the Antichrist, he will be a pontiff without human honors, and he will not have the public importance hitherto attributed to the Bishop of Rome. He will live in relative secrecy, characterized by persecution and martyrdom. Blessed Catherine Emmerich says he will be dressed in red, that is, be leading the life of a martyr, of the undead martyr. Therefore, he will lead a crucified existence. Yet he will be able to instill warmth and confidence in souls and will recompose the moral and doctrinal disintegration of the Catholic Church. I swear to you, because now one must speak like this, I am moved. Sorry, I'm very moved. When I authored this book, I did not know of the prophecy of Saint Amadeo. Look at what I wrote. I felt it in my heart, and now I'm even more moved. What do you want? I live and die for all of this. I live and die for all of this. He will lead the churches of the East back to the seat of St. Peter. Do you see all this? But this is the action of the Holy Spirit. So, Don Juan Marchi, it's working out. This is nice. How wonderful. The Spirit is at work. Because when I swear to you, as Brignano says, I swear to you. I authored this book here. I did not know the prophecy of Saint Amadeo, because otherwise I would have inserted it. It came too late. But God has his own time. And he allowed it for it. And he allowed for this because I draw a profile without knowing that of Saint Gabriel the Archangel, who precisely because he will lead the Eastern churches back to the seat of St. Peter. This practically recalls that of St. Gabriel the Archangel himself. Moreover, as I write, he will not reside in Rome, that is meanwhile occupied by the Antichrist, but will travel everywhere without ever being stopped, because this is how God disposes. In fact, he will enjoy special protection until he finishes his mission. The devil will try to stop him, trying to spoil him in food and sleep, and constantly provoking his nervous system. He will also create an evil magnetic field around him, so many souls, initially dazzled by his charisma, will eventually betray him and even slander him. But what will be everyone's amazement is that he will go on all the way. His task is singular: to guard the Catholic faith and support true believers during the time of the Antichrist. Thank you. There are 2,101 people. I'm very gratified. I hope that all of you who have followed can follow the logos instead of the anti-logos. That is, understanding that I have not made arguments on strange, extravagant, or misleading themes, but are all proven in the light of accredited prophecies. Benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater Filius et Spiritus Sanctus. Amen. Praise be Jesus Christ, and forward with Mary.